Pericles and Athens, the golden age of Greece seen through the life of our leading statesman. This was the end of the revolution at Epidamnos, but by this time the original cause of the dispute was no longer the vital point. Corinth settled herself grimly to prepare for an overwhelming force. For 2 years her shipyards worked, till she had 90 triremes, the largest fleet that Corinth ever set to sea. Her colonies and allies raised 60 more. Her crews were supplemented with hired rowers from abroad, largely from the allies of Athens. So far as it is noteworthy, both Athens and Sparta had remained strictly neutral, Sparta using her diplomacy to restrain Corinth, and Athens allowing her allies to enlist in the Corinthian service. In view of Athens' later behavior, one might suspect that many Athenians were not unwilling to see pressure on Kerkyra increasing, calculating accurately what the result would be. At Kerkyra, men watched with increasing alarm the growth of Corinth's armaments. They could not, it appears, because their own naval strength, probably because their isolation and unpopularity prevented them from hiring foreign crews. The rowers, unlike those of Athens, were largely slaves, but only citizens of Kerkyra could be trusted to fight on deck. As the Corinthian buildup proceeded, they realized that their cherished isolation would no longer serve. In 433, an embassy from Kerkyra set sail for Athens. The Corinthians soon heard of this move and sent a counter delegation, and Thucydides, all this English pronouncing the S with the Z sound kind of throws me off sometimes, gives a detailed summary of the debate that resulted. The Corinthians urged their own recent correct and friendly behavior, the desirability of furthering the recent detente between the states, the Kerkyraeans, the strategic advantages of the alliance which they could offer in view of what one of them called Sparta's desire for war, through fear of Athens, their desire to secure Kerkyra as a preliminary to operations against you. One of the things more and more as the war technology grows is the general people, we wish we don't have war, the horror of the war. You think, I'll just be a bomber and all that stuff, and you realize what you've done. And it's even more horrible on a lot of those people than it is, killing people by hand and knife and stuff. But it's so much easier to do. You can kill thousands or even millions of people with less, in a disconnected way. And then you realize, these assertions about Corinth and Sparta were, as we've seen, not borne out by those states' recent conduct. And when, after hearing both sides, the assembly stood adjourned, public opinion was, on the whole, for refusing to intervene. But next day, after speakers of Athens had been heard, there was a change of feeling. The speakers argued that in view of the probability of another war anyhow, the prospective enemy must not be allowed to secure Kerkyra. So the decisive step was taken. Athens made with Kerkyra not a full alliance, for under that, Kerkyra could have demanded a joint offensive against Corinth, contrary to the treatment of 445, but a defensive alliance only. And a modest token squadron of 10 ships, a warning, not a threat, was ordered to Kerkyra. The general selected, too, was one anxious to avoid war, with the Peloponnese. Lacedaemonios, son of Cimon, whose name means Spartan, and whom Pericles had once twitted with, being more Spartan than Athenian, even in name. So Pericles twitted with people, and the current president in the new form of MAGA is tweeting with people. But Pericles knew well that the die had been cast. It may have been from this Kerkyra debate, or later, that his saying is quoted. I see, as it were, a cloud of war rising from the Peloponnese. Peloponnesa? Maybe. The expression war cloud was a new metaphor then. From this time on, the cloud continued to rise, relentlessly till it covered the sky. The Corinthians' blood was up, and they were no longer acting on a basis of cold calculation. It soon became clear that 10 ships under a son of Cimon were not going to deter them, and Athens sent 20 more under Glaucon. Xanthippos, his brother-in-law, and Dracontides, who, through a colleague of Pericles, was no friend of him. 30 good Athenian ships plus the navy of Kerkyra should be sufficient to ensure that Corinth could not gain a victory. It would have been almost as easy to send 60 ships or 100, but apart from expense, the assembly was acting on the calculation especially thrashed out in the debate, that it was good policy to let other navies fight each other in order to weaken them. Again, I think war should be in terms of a general peacekeeping force rather than, what we're used to. The 20 ships left Piraeus on their long voyage round the Peloponnese, only just in time. They had, in fact, not reached Kerkyra when the enemy were reported approaching the island, and the Kerkyrians, with the 10 Athenian ships, which were under orders to avoid actual fighting unless the enemy attempted a landing, put out against them. There was severe, protracted, and bloody fighting between the two great fleets of galleys, their decks crowded with archers and armored soldiers. The Athenians noted with contempt that there had been no move in these Dorian navies to reduce the number of passengers and maneuver, but how do you say that? Maneuver for an attack with the ram in the modern style. I don't know how modern it is. The ram as far as the SWAT team, but not typically a war device. Gradually, numbers told, especially as the Kerkyrian left wing, which defeated Corinth's allies, wasted time in the long pursuit. 2/3 of Kerkyra's navy were being overwhelmed, and the Athenians, seeing the Kerkyrians hard pressed, began to intervene more unreservedly. At first, they held off to the extent of not actually ramming, but when the rout was becoming plain to see that the Corinthians were pressing on, then indeed it was all hands to the work, and there was no more distinction. And so it came to this, that the Corinthians and the Athenians lifted their hands against each other. First blood had been shed in the Peloponnesian War. So I am aware that ramming is not just a ram is not just a device. It's an action to ram. Meanwhile, the 20 ships under Glaucon and Dracontides were coming up from Cephallenia at cruising speed, knowing nothing of what was taking place, but timing their journey to reach Kerkyra by nightfall. At the moment when they sighted the island, the Corinthians, having reformed, were about to attack again, while the remnants of the defending fleet were preparing for a desperate resistance against an attempted landing. It was late evening, continues Thucydides, and men had raised the battle hymn, ready to engage, when the Corinthians suddenly backed water. They had seen 20 Athenian ships coming up, and suspected that there were more. Thus the battle ended at nightfall, and the 20 ships sailed in, through the corpses and wreckage, and came to land. So narrowly did Kerkyra escape disaster. Next morning, the whole 30 Athenian ships, and what was left of their allies, sailed across the Corinthian anchorage and offered battle, but the Corinthians, with many ships damaged, and no facilities for repair, had no stomach for it. They stood on the defensive, close inshore, and sent over a cutter to protest, without a herald's staff, the customary flag of truce, in token that they did not recognize a state of war as existing with Athens. The Athenians replied that they were not starting a war, nor contravening the 30 years' peace, but they were defending their allies. If the Corinthians desired to sail home or anywhere else but against Kerkyra, the sea was open. Angry and humiliated, the Corinthians went. Well, certainly protecting your allies in a time of... Okay, this next chapter is going to be 2 videos too. It's important to regard your treaties with your allies and protect your allies. It's not just... When war is about the interest of one country, that's a good sign that it's not really something that should be being done.